Richard Caldwell laughed when I asked for 4 days to bury my father. My name is Douglas Patterson, 45 years old, Chief IT Systems Administrator at Sterling Financial Services in Charlotte, North Carolina. 14 years I spent building their entire technical infrastructure from basic server management into sophisticated cloud systems, supporting $40 million in annual operations. When I explained that my father had died unexpectedly and I needed bereavement leave, Richard looked up from his desk and actually laughed. "Douglas, business first. We're in the middle of quarter-end closing. You can have 1 day for the funeral, then you need to be back here managing our systems." I said nothing, just nodded once, walked back to my desk, and pressed 3 keys that started a sequence. By midnight, every server, database, cloud account, and email system Richard needed to operate his company was locked behind encryption only I could unlock. Have you ever watched someone discover they built their entire business on systems controlled by the one person they just told to prioritize work over burying their father? My career in IT systems administration began in 2010 when I joined Sterling Financial Services as their first dedicated technical support specialist. The company employed 32 people back then, providing investment advisory services to regional clients throughout the Carolinas. They needed someone to manage their basic server infrastructure, maintain email systems, and handle routine technical support for office staff. Standard small business IT work. Nothing sophisticated. I took the position because it offered stability and the chance to build something from scratch. Over the next 14 years, I transformed their technical infrastructure from simple file servers and basic email into comprehensive cloud-based systems managing client portfolios, financial transactions, regulatory compliance documentation, and encrypted communications required for handling sensitive financial information. Every piece of that infrastructure existed because I built it, maintained it, and secured it. The employment contract I signed in 2010 granted me complete administrative access to all company systems with minimal oversight. Made sense at the time. Small company, one IT person, needed flexibility to manage everything efficiently. Nobody questioned the arrangement. Nobody understood what it actually meant. That contract gave me root access to every server, administrator privileges on every cloud account, master keys to every database, and sole control over authentication protocols protecting all company data. Richard Caldwell became CEO in 2021 after the founding partners retired and sold their ownership stakes to a private equity group. Richard came from investment banking, focused entirely on profit margins and operational efficiency. He viewed technical infrastructure as overhead expense rather than critical business foundation, viewed me as just IT support who fixed computers and maintained email, never bothered learning what I actually controlled or how the company's operations depended entirely on systems only I could access. During his first month as CEO, I tried explaining our technical architecture, showed him documentation about single points of failure and the need for backup administrators with shared access. Richard interrupted midway through. "Douglas, I don't need technical details. Just keep the systems running and stay within budget. That's your job." His dismissiveness was clear. I was support staff who should remain invisible unless something broke. I documented that conversation, saved the email where I recommended hiring additional IT staff and implementing proper redundancy protocols. Richard's response was 3 words: unnecessary overhead expense. So I continued as the sole administrator, with complete control over every digital asset Sterling Financial Services operated on. The company grew to 120 employees, expanded to 4 regional offices, and managed 2,000 client accounts worth $40 million annually. All of it running on infrastructure I alone controlled. Richard never reconsidered the staffing structure, never implemented backup procedures, never questioned why one person had exclusive access to everything the company needed to function. My father died on a Tuesday morning in October, massive heart attack at 68, gone before the ambulance arrived. I got the call from my sister at 7 a.m., spent an hour sitting in my car in the Sterling parking lot, processing the fact that the man who taught me everything about integrity and responsibility was gone. Then I went inside and sent Richard a formal email requesting 4 days of bereavement leave to handle funeral arrangements and family matters. company policy allowed up to 5 days for immediate family deaths. Standard corporate benefit. Basic human decency. Richard called me into his office 20 minutes later. I brought the bereavement policy documentation. He waved it away without reading. "Douglas, I understand you're dealing with a personal loss, but we're in the middle of quarter-end financial closing. Our client reporting systems need constant monitoring. You can take 1 day for the funeral itself, then I need you back here. Business first. You understand how these things work." His tone suggested he was being generous, accommodating. 1 day to bury my father while he needed me, to babysit systems that ran automatically unless someone actively broke them. I stood there for a long moment, watching Richard return his attention to spreadsheets on his monitor. He'd already moved on, dismissed my father's death as a minor scheduling inconvenience, made his position clear. Business operations mattered more than allowing me time to grieve or handle family responsibilities. I could have argued, could have cited policy, could have explained that the systems didn't actually require my constant presence, but I didn't. Just said I understand and walked out. Returned to my desk and opened the administrative console that controlled every technical system Sterling Financial Services operated on. 14 years of building infrastructure had created something remarkable. Every server, every database, every cloud storage account, every authentication system, every backup protocol existed under my exclusive administrative control. Nobody else had root access. Nobody else possessed master encryption keys. Nobody else could modify authentication requirements or access security protocols. The architecture was entirely centralized around my credentials, my physical devices, my personal authorization. Richard thought this meant I was essential for keeping things running. What it actually meant was I could stop everything instantly if I chose to. Have you ever spent 14 years building systems so comprehensive that you realize you hold complete control over whether a company can function at all? The realization carries weight. I'd never considered using that control as leverage, never imagined needing to, but Richard's dismissal of my father's death changed the equation. He'd made clear that I was a resource to be utilized, not a person deserving basic consideration. So I decided to demonstrate exactly what happens when you treat your sole systems administrator as disposable during the worst moment of his life. The lockdown process took 3 hours of methodical execution, started by changing every administrative password across all company systems, root passwords on physical servers, administrator credentials for cloud platforms, master keys for database access, authentication codes for email infrastructure. Everything modified to complex random strings stored only in encrypted files on my personal devices. Next step involved enabling two-factor authentication on every critical system, tied exclusively to authenticator apps on my phone. Even if someone somehow guessed the new passwords, they'd need my physical device to complete authentication. Final step required activating encryption protocols on all file servers and cloud storage accounts, protocols that required my physical presence at the office to unlock because they used hardware security keys stored in my desk. The process was elegant, completely reversible, but absolutely impenetrable without my cooperation. By 6 p.m., every digital system Sterling Financial Services depended on was secured behind access only I could provide. Email servers locked, client database encrypted, financial transaction systems inaccessible, cloud storage requiring authentication nobody else possessed. The $40 million company Richard managed had just become completely inoperative. I sent one email before leaving, not to Richard, to my personal account. Subject line: Emergency System Maintenance, Restoration Protocol. Body contained detailed instructions for reversing every security measure I'd implemented. Documentation proving the lockdown was deliberate and reversible rather than malicious destruction. Then I packed my personal belongings, left my access badge and office keys on my desk, and drove home. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Wednesday. Richard's assistant Jennifer calling about email system failures. I didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. Douglas, the email server isn't responding and nobody can access client accounts. We need you to fix this immediately. The desperation in her voice was evident. I deleted the message without responding. Second call came at 7:30 from Richard himself. Douglas, what the hell is going on with our systems? Get in here and fix this now. Still demanding. still treating me as subordinate who should drop everything for his convenience. Deleted that message too. By 8 a.m. the voicemails were piling up. Jennifer called 6 more times. Richard called 4 times. The company's external IT support contractor called twice asking for administrative credentials to troubleshoot system failures. I answered none of them. Just drove to my hometown 4 hours away for my father's funeral arrangements. Turned my phone to silent and focused on family responsibilities. The responsibilities Richard decided were less important than monitoring systems that didn't actually need monitoring. Meanwhile, back in Charlotte, Sterling Financial Services was discovering what complete operational paralysis looked like. Employees couldn't access email to communicate with clients. Transaction processing systems were locked. Financial records were inaccessible. Client portfolio data was encrypted. The cloud infrastructure holding all company information was completely locked down. Everything the company needed to conduct business existed on systems only I could unlock. And I was unreachable, attending to family matters Richard thought should be handled in one day. Have you noticed that people who tell you to prioritize work over family tragedy never consider what happens when you're the only person keeping their business operational? The emergency IT contractors Richard called arrived at the Sterling offices by 9 a.m. Wednesday, experienced professionals specializing in system recovery and security breaches. They assessed the situation and delivered devastating news. Every system was locked behind military-grade encryption and multi-factor authentication tied to Douglas Patterson's personal credentials and devices. Breaking the security protocols without authorized access codes would likely corrupt or destroy all company data. The risk was absolute. Attempting forced entry could eliminate years of financial records, client information, and transaction histories. The company's entire digital existence could be wiped out by aggressive recovery attempts. The contractors recommended waiting for Patterson to return and provide authorized access. Richard rejected that recommendation, demanded they find another solution. They tried for 6 hours, made no progress. By afternoon, they confirmed what Richard didn't want to hear. Douglas Patterson held complete control, and forcing access would destroy the company. The board of directors started receiving emergency calls from major clients. Investment portfolios couldn't be accessed. Financial statements were unavailable. Scheduled transactions weren't processing. Regulatory reporting deadlines were approaching with no access to required documentation. Client representatives were threatening contract terminations and potential lawsuits for service failures. The crisis was expanding rapidly. Richard's assistant compiled the damage assessment. $180,000 in stopped operations per day. 7 major clients threatening immediate contract termination, representing $12 million in annual revenue. Regulatory compliance violations accumulating. Potential lawsuits for fiduciary duty failures. Richard's calls to me became increasingly desperate throughout Wednesday and Thursday. The demanding tone disappeared, replaced by pleading, offering apologies, promising full bereavement leave, suggesting raises and bonuses, all going straight to voicemail while I attended my father's funeral, made funeral arrangements, supported my mother and sister, handled estate matters, did exactly what Richard said I could only take 1 day to accomplish. His 43rd call came Friday afternoon. I was at the cemetery, watched it go to voicemail like all the others. Douglas, please. The company is completely shut down. Clients are leaving. The board is threatening to fire me. Name your terms, whatever you want. Just restore access and we'll work everything out. The panic in his voice was profound. He'd finally understood what I controlled and what his dismissiveness had cost. I didn't respond. Waited until Saturday morning, after my father's funeral was complete and immediate family matters were handled, before returning his calls. He answered on the first ring. Douglas, thank God. We need you to come back immediately and restore system access. The company is losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Clients are furious. What do you need? Name anything. I kept my voice calm and professional. Richard, I resigned effective Tuesday evening when you told me business comes before burying my father. I'm no longer a Sterling Financial Services employee. My employment relationship ended when you made clear that my personal tragedy was a scheduling inconvenience. Silence on his end. Then, carefully, Douglas, you can't just lock us out of our own systems and walk away. That's extortion. We'll have you arrested. I'd anticipated this response, prepared for it legally. Richard, I implemented enhanced security protocols on Tuesday evening before leaving the office. Standard administrative procedure when an IT administrator resigns. I documented the entire process in my final status report, emailed to my personal account. The systems aren't damaged or destroyed. They're simply secured pending proper transition to replacement administrators. I'm happy to provide system restoration services under appropriate consulting terms. The legal positioning was deliberate. I hadn't stolen anything or destroyed anything, just secured systems as part of normal resignation procedures. The fact that nobody else had access wasn't criminal. It was consequence of Richard's failure to implement proper redundancy. Richard tried negotiating. We'll give you full bereavement leave, a raise to $130,000, and forget this ever happened. Just come back and unlock everything. I let him finish, then delivered my terms. Richard, I'll provide system restoration consulting for $75,000, paid in advance. Additionally, Sterling Financial Services will provide immediate resignation acceptance with full severance, including 6 months' salary at my current compensation level, accumulated vacation payout, and continuation of health benefits for 1 year. Finally, we'll execute mutual non-disparagement agreements. Those are my terms, non-negotiable. More silence, then desperate. Douglas, that's over $200,000 total. You're holding the company hostage. I corrected him. Richard, I'm offering professional consulting services to restore systems that require my exclusive knowledge and access. You're free to hire other contractors if they can bypass security protocols I implemented. The IT specialists you already consulted confirmed that's not possible without destroying company data. My terms reflect the value of my specialized knowledge and the urgency of your situation. You have 4 hours to accept. After that, I begin discussions with Sterling's competitors who've expressed interest in my expertise. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting Saturday afternoon. Richard presented the situation, explained that Douglas Patterson had locked all company systems and was demanding $200,000 for restoration. The board members listened, then asked the obvious question. How did one IT administrator gain complete control over every company system with no redundancy or backup access? Richard couldn't answer. Tried blaming me for implementing excessive security. The board wasn't sympathetic. Their outside counsel reviewed my resignation email and final status report, confirmed I'd followed standard security protocols when leaving. The lockdown wasn't criminal. It was consequence of catastrophic IT governance failures. The company had operated for years with single-point dependency on one employee, ignored recommendations for redundancy, and then antagonized that employee during family tragedy. The board concluded Richard's denial of bereavement leave directly caused the crisis. They authorized my consulting terms, $75,000 for immediate system restoration, full severance package worth approximately $140,000, non-disparagement agreement protecting both parties. Richard was instructed to accept immediately. He called me back within 2 hours, voice tight with controlled anger. Douglas, the board has authorized your terms. When can you restore access? I was gracious. I'll return to the office Monday morning at 8 a.m. The restoration process will take approximately 4 hours. I'll need the consulting payment confirmed and severance documentation signed before beginning work. Richard agreed. Probably expected me to gloat or make demands. I didn't. Just confirmed the arrangements and ended the call. Professional, businesslike. Exactly the tone Richard had used when laughing at my bereavement request. Monday morning, I walked into Sterling Financial Services with my attorney present. Richard was already there with the company's legal counsel. We signed the consulting agreement, the severance documentation, and the non-disparagement terms without conversation. Just legal paperwork and signatures. The board had wired the consulting payment to my account Friday evening. Everything documented and official. Then I sat down at my old desk and began systematic restoration of every system I'd locked down. Changed administrative passwords back to secure credentials that I provided to the new IT director the board had hired over the weekend. Disabled the enhanced two-factor authentication. Decrypted the file servers and cloud storage. Restored email access. Unlocked the client databases and transaction systems. By noon, Sterling Financial Services was operational again. Every system functioning exactly as it had Tuesday morning before I secured them. Nothing damaged, Nothing lost, just 4 days of complete paralysis, because Richard thought business should come before burying my father. I provided the new IT director with comprehensive documentation about system architecture and security protocols, walked him through redundancy recommendations Richard had ignored for 3 years, made sure he understood the catastrophic single-point failures I'd been warning about since 2021. Then I packed my personal belongings, collected my signed severance agreement and left Sterling Financial Services for the last time. Richard didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, just watched from his office as I walked out. His expression suggested he understood exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. By Wednesday, I accepted a position with Montgomery Investment Group, one of Sterling's largest competitors, Chief Systems Administrator at $145,000 annually, plus benefits and equity participation. They'd heard about the Sterling situation through industry channels, called me Monday afternoon with an offer. The conversation started with their CEO expressing condolences about my father and explaining that Montgomery provided 2 weeks paid bereavement leave for immediate family deaths. No questions, no demands to prioritize business. Just basic human decency that Sterling couldn't manage. Have you ever discovered that being treated with cruelty creates opportunities you wouldn't have considered if people had just been decent? The aftermath for Richard was swift and comprehensive. The Sterling board conducted a formal review of the crisis, examined how Richard's denial of bereavement leave triggered 4 days of operational paralysis, costing hundreds of thousands in lost revenue and client departures, investigated why the company operated with single-point IT dependency, despite repeated warnings, reviewed Richard's management decisions over his 3-year tenure. The findings weren't favorable. Richard had systematically ignored infrastructure recommendations, treated key employees as disposable resources, and created organizational vulnerabilities through short-term cost-cutting. The bereavement leave denial was just the most visible example of his leadership failures. The board terminated Richard's employment as CEO effective 2 weeks after I restored the systems, cited catastrophic failure of employee relations and operational security oversight. His severance was minimal. Standard contractual provisions, no bonuses, no extended benefits, just the minimum required by his employment agreement. He tried fighting it, claimed the board was scapegoating him for my actions. The board's position was clear. Richard created the conditions that allowed one employee to paralyze the entire company. He refused to implement proper redundancy, despite professional recommendations. He antagonized the sole administrator with complete system control during that administrator's family tragedy. The consequences were entirely his responsibility. Richard's reputation in Charlotte financial services circles was destroyed within weeks. Everyone knew what happened, how he'd laughed at a bereavement request and lost control of his entire company as a result. The story circulated through industry networks as a cautionary tale about treating IT staff with respect and implementing proper system redundancy. The Sterling Financial Services recovery took 6 months. They lost 4 major clients representing $8 million in annual revenue, spent nearly $300,000 on emergency IT restructuring and implementing proper administrative redundancy, hired 3 additional IT administrators to eliminate single-point dependencies. The new CEO, appointed by the board in December, reached out to me through professional channels, asked if I'd consider consulting to help rebuild their technical infrastructure. I declined politely. Montgomery Investment Group was providing everything I'd wanted from Sterling: challenging technical work, humane management, proper compensation, no reason to look back. But I appreciated the gesture, showed that Sterling's new leadership understood what the old leadership had missed. The technical staff you depend on deserve respect and consideration, not dismissal during family tragedy. My role at Montgomery grew quickly. Within 6 months, I was promoted to Director of Information Technology, managing a team of 8 administrators and overseeing all technical infrastructure for a $70 million operation. The work was complex and rewarding. The management was professional and supportive. When another family emergency arose, they granted me leave immediately without questions, treated me like a valued professional rather than a disposable resource. The contrast with Richard's leadership was stark. Montgomery's CEO understood something Richard never grasped. Technical infrastructure isn't overhead expense. its business foundation. The people who build and maintain that infrastructure aren't support staff to be dismissed casually. They're professionals who enable everything else the company does. Treating them with respect isn't corporate kindness, it's basic operational competence. I spoke at several IT management conferences over the following year, shared the story of what happened at Sterling, not to gloat or seek revenge, to illustrate the critical importance of IT redundancy and professional employee treatment. The presentations focused on single-point failure risks and the catastrophic consequences of depending entirely on one administrator. But audience members always asked about Richard, about his dismissal of bereavement leave, about the 4 days of paralysis, about his termination. The questions revealed something interesting. Every IT professional in those audiences had experienced similar dismissiveness, maybe not during bereavement situations specifically, but the same fundamental disrespect. Being treated as overhead rather than essential staff, having recommendations ignored by executives who didn't understand technical dependencies, being expected to sacrifice personal matters for business convenience. My story resonated because it represented something rare. An IT administrator who actually held the leverage everyone assumes IT people have, and who used it after being pushed too far. The satisfaction wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about validation. Proof that technical expertise matters, that the people who build and maintain business infrastructure deserve consideration, that cruelty toward the wrong person at the wrong time can have consequences that executives never imagined. Several conference attendees approached me afterward, shared their own experiences with dismissive management and single-point technical dependencies. One administrator from Atlanta described a nearly identical situation. CEO denied bereavement leave for his mother's funeral, expected him to work through family grief. The administrator didn't have my level of system control, so he'd just resigned and left them scrambling. Still cost the company millions in disrupted operations and replacement training. The pattern was consistent. Executives who viewed technical staff as easily replaceable discovered the hard way that specialized knowledge and institutional expertise take years to develop and moments to lose. Standing in my office at Montgomery Investment Group 18 months after leaving Sterling, I reflected on what Richard's cruelty had inadvertently created: a better position, with superior compensation and professional treatment, industry recognition through conference presentations and consulting opportunities. Most importantly, validation that technical expertise deserves respect and that basic human decency matters more than quarterly revenue targets. The expanded office accommodated my team of 8 IT administrators who managed all technical operations for Montgomery's growing client base. We'd implemented proper redundancy protocols from day one, multiple administrators with shared access to critical systems, documented procedures for emergency succession, regular training to ensure knowledge distribution. Everything I'd recommended to Richard 3 years earlier, and he'd dismissed as unnecessary expense. Montgomery's CEO appreciated the investment, understood that technical infrastructure resilience was worth the administrative overhead. The company operated smoothly because systems didn't depend on any single person. When team members needed personal time, they got it without questions or guilt. When family emergencies arose, management responded with support rather than dismissal. The professional environment reflected values that Richard apparently thought were incompatible with business success. My father's death had taught me something Richard never understood. Business doesn't actually have to come first. Basic human decency can coexist with operational success. Companies that treat employees with respect during difficult times build loyalty and dedication that no amount of demanding pressure can create. Richard's philosophy that personal tragedies were scheduling inconveniences ultimately destroyed his career and damaged his company. My refusal to accept that philosophy created opportunities for professional growth that exceeded anything Sterling could have provided. The quarterly financial results at Montgomery showed what proper IT investment and employee treatment could accomplish. Revenue up 23% year over year, client retention at 94%, zero operational disruptions from technical failures. The board credited our IT infrastructure stability as a competitive advantage in an industry where system reliability mattered enormously to clients. Financial services companies live or die based on operational consistency. Montgomery systems ran flawlessly because we'd invested in proper architecture and respected the professionals who maintained it. Sterling Financial Services continued struggling. Lost additional clients throughout the following year. Never recovered the reputation damage from the 4-day paralysis. The industry remembered. Potential clients asked questions about operational stability during sales presentations. The answers weren't reassuring. Even after rebuilding their IT infrastructure, Sterling carried the stigma of catastrophic management failures. Richard's brief tenure as CEO became a cautionary tale, discussed in business school case studies about employee relations and operational risk management. His name appeared alongside phrases like catastrophic leadership failure and dangerous single-point dependency. His career never recovered fully, took a position at a smaller firm in a different city, never regained executive leadership role. The consequences of laughing at bereavement leave and dismissing basic human consideration followed him professionally. Meanwhile, I'd built a career around the opposite approach, treating technical staff with respect, implementing proper system redundancy, recognizing that people matter more than quarterly metrics. The approach generated better business outcomes while creating work environments where professionals could contribute their best efforts without sacrificing family obligations or personal well-being. Looking back at the moment when Richard laughed at my bereavement request, I realized he'd made a fundamental error in judgment. He assumed his authority as CEO meant he could dismiss my needs without consequence. He never considered that I might control something he couldn't function without. He never imagined that cruelty during tragedy could cost him everything. His miscalculation was complete and catastrophic. By treating me as disposable during the worst moment of my life, he'd created the exact conditions where I had nothing to lose from demonstrating his dependency on my expertise. The lockdown wasn't planned revenge. It was spontaneous recognition that someone who laughs at your father's death doesn't deserve cooperation or consideration. Richard wanted business first. So I showed him what business looked like when the person maintaining every technical system decided to attend to personal matters, regardless of corporate convenience. The 4 days of paralysis cost his company hundreds of thousands in immediate losses and millions in long-term damage, cost him his career, cost him his professional reputation, all because he couldn't grant basic bereavement leave without dismissing legitimate grief as scheduling inconvenience. The lesson was stark. Technical professionals control more than executives realize. The invisible infrastructure that enables business operations depends on specialized knowledge that can't be replaced quickly. Treating the people who maintain that infrastructure with cruelty during vulnerable moments creates risks that no disaster recovery plan can address. Richard learned that lesson the hardest way possible, through complete operational collapse and professional destruction. My father taught me throughout his life that integrity matters more than immediate convenience, that treating people decently creates lasting relationships built on mutual respect, that short-term selfishness ultimately costs more than generous consideration. Richard's failure to understand those basic principles cost him everything. My commitment to those principles created opportunities exceeding anything I'd imagined when first joining Sterling Financial Services 14 years earlier. The technical infrastructure I built at Montgomery became a model for the financial services industry. Multiple firms consulted with us about implementing similar redundancy protocols and professional management approaches. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities generated supplemental income of $90,000 annually, while reinforcing my expertise in operational risk management and IT governance. Richard's catastrophic failure had inadvertently created my reputation as the definitive expert in technical infrastructure resilience and employee relations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone familiar with the story. The person Richard dismissed during family tragedy became the industry authority on why treating technical staff with respect matters for operational stability. The Sterling situation became my credentials, proof that I understood both the technical architecture and the human dynamics that successful companies require. Montgomery's CEO frequently noted that hiring me was one of his best decisions, not just because of technical expertise, but because I brought perspective about treating professionals with dignity and building organizational resilience through proper redundancy. You lived through what happens when companies fail at both technical architecture and employee treatment, he observed. For that experience makes you uniquely qualified to prevent those failures elsewhere. The recognition was gratifying, not because it validated my response to Richard's cruelty, but because it confirmed that basic decency and professional competence weren't contradictory values. They were complementary approaches that enhanced each other. Companies could treat employees well while achieving business success. Technical infrastructure could be properly funded while maintaining profitability. The false choice Richard presented between business and personal matters wasn't actually necessary. It was just convenient excuse for cruelty disguised as tough management. Standing in Montgomery's expanded data center 30 months after the Sterling situation, I reflected on what Richard's laughter had ultimately created. Superior professional position with doubled compensation, industry recognition as an IT governance expert. Most importantly, daily reminder that treating people decently matters more than any quarterly revenue target. The data center represented everything Richard said was unnecessary expense: redundant servers, multiple administrators with shared access, comprehensive backup protocols, documented succession procedures, emergency response systems. Montgomery had invested in all of it because they understood that technical infrastructure resilience was worth every dollar spent. The investment paid for itself through perfect operational uptime and client confidence that their financial data was protected and accessible without interruption. Richard's approach of minimizing IT costs and depending on single administrators created vulnerability disguised as efficiency. Montgomery's approach of proper infrastructure investment created resilience that became competitive advantage. The contrast demonstrated which philosophy actually supported business success. My team of administrators rotated responsibilities regularly. Everyone had complete system knowledge. Nobody held exclusive access to critical infrastructure. When team members needed personal time, operations continued seamlessly. When family emergencies arose, colleagues provided coverage without disruption. The structure Richard rejected as unnecessary expense was actually essential protection against the exact crisis he experienced. If Sterling had implemented proper redundancy, my bereavement leave request would have been approved without concern. The company could have functioned perfectly for 4 days without me. Richard could have granted basic human decency without worrying about operational impact. His refusal to invest in that redundancy meant my departure paralyzed everything. His catastrophic judgment failures weren't just about denying bereavement leave. They were about building organizational vulnerability through years of short-term thinking and disregard for professional recommendations. The people who attempt to exploit others' vulnerability during tragedy sometimes end up creating opportunities for their victims to achieve greater success through validated expertise and comprehensive ethical standards. Richard's cruelty inadvertently provided the foundation for building industry leadership, professional recognition, and technical operations that represented the most successful and meaningful period in my 14-year IT career. Professional relationships built on systematic respect and ethical standards prove more durable and valuable than corporate positions based on convenient arrangements or management philosophies that treat employees as disposable resources subject to casual cruelty. The IT operations I developed at Montgomery generated better business outcomes, enhanced industry recognition, and more meaningful professional relationships than anything traditional employment at Sterling could have achieved. Richard's laughter at my bereavement request ultimately strengthened my career while destroying his. The experience proved that professional competence combined with basic human decency could transform attempted exploitation into opportunities for growth that exceeded original employment arrangements. Sometimes the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's demonstrating through success and ethical practices that decent treatment creates better outcomes for everyone involved. The companies willing to invest in both technical infrastructure and human consideration thrive. The executives who view employees as overhead to be minimized eventually face consequences they never imagined. Richard learned that lesson through professional destruction. I learned it through career advancement and industry recognition. The contrast speaks for itself about which approach actually supports sustainable success. If this story of technical expertise and professional boundaries resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to Revenge Tales with Luke. Share your experiences with workplace cruelty and operational consequences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else facing similar challenges with dismissive management and critical system control. See you in our next story.